Episode 6, Loki's Whispers. Loki found Storm in Asgard's gardens, vast spaces where plants from across the 9 realms grew in impossible proximity, maintained through magic that made Earth's best botanists look incompetent. She'd been attempting to meditate, to center herself using techniques Professor Xavier had taught her, but Asgard's omnipresent divine energy made finding mental quiet nearly impossible. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Loki said, appearing from shadows that shouldn't have existed in broad daylight. "Though personally, I find the careful cultivation a bit oppressive. Every plant in its designated space, every flower blooming on schedule, every weed eliminated before it can disrupt the aesthetic perfection. Very Asgardian, very limiting." "You have a point to make, or are you just here to demonstrate your ability to appear uninvited?" Storm asked, not opening her eyes. "Both, actually," Loki replied, settling onto a bench near where Storm sat cross-legged on grass that felt artificial in its perfection. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about what you could do with Asgardian authority, and I realized I didn't fully articulate the opportunity you're dismissing. The opportunity to become a tyrant who imposes her will on Earth using alien military force," Storm asked. "Yes, you articulated that quite clearly." "I articulated it poorly," Loki corrected. "Let me try again, with more nuance and less obvious villainy. You're one of Earth's most powerful mutants. Omega level, I believe the classification is. You command weather with precision that most beings never achieve. You've saved countless lives, led teams, fought threats that would have destroyed your world. And despite all that, despite your obvious heroism and capability, your people are persecuted, hunted by sentinels, legislated against by governments, treated as threats rather than protectors." "Yes?" Storm opened her eyes, her expression guarded. "Yes." "Now imagine," Loki continued, "that you didn't have to convince humans to respect mutants. Imagine that respect was enforced not through legislation that can be repealed, or public opinion that shifts with every attack, but through divine authority that transcends mortal politics. Asgard's word carries weight across Earth. If Asgard's queen declared mutants under divine protection, it declared that harm to mutants would be met with Asgardian intervention. How many sentinel programs would continue? How many bigots would continue their persecution, knowing that a goddess backed by immortal warriors would respond?" "That's not protection," Storm replied. "That's colonialism with a benevolent face, using superior power to impose order on people who should have the right to govern themselves." "Even when they govern themselves into genocide?" Loki asked. "Because that's what's happening, Storm. Slowly, through legislative erosion and social persecution and technological development of weapons specifically designed to kill your people. You know this. You've fought it for years, and you're losing. Not because you're not powerful enough or heroic enough, but because democratic systems are slow and can be corrupted by fear. Divine authority isn't democratic, but it's efficient, and it could save your people's lives." Storm was silent for a long moment, watching alien flowers bloom on schedules determined by Asgardian magic. "You're describing fascism, benevolent fascism maybe, but still fascism. Rule by a powerful elite who decide what's best for those beneath them." "I'm describing the reality of how power functions," Loki countered. "Thor will claim Asgard's throne, assuming he proves superior in the duel, and he'll rule with authority that doesn't require democratic consent. That's not fascism to Asgardians. That's just how divine monarchy works. The question isn't whether someone will wield absolute power. The question is who wields it and to what ends. Thor will wield it to maintain tradition, to uphold Asgard's interests, to protect the 9 realms according to priorities that put Asgard first. You could wield it to protect those who need protection most, to give voice to the voiceless, to ensure that power serves justice rather than tradition. "And you?" Storm asked, turning to face Loki directly. "What would you do with Asgard's throne? Because all of this, the philosophical arguments, the temptation, the emphasis on protecting mutants, it's manipulation towards some goal you're not stating. So what do you actually want?" Loki smiled, and it was genuine enough to be unsettling. "I want Asgard to change. I'm adopted, did I mention that? Laufey's son, taken from Jotunheim as an infant, raised as Odin's second son in a realm that will never truly see me as one of them. I've spent a millennium watching Thor receive credit for victories we achieved together, watching him be groomed for kingship while I was groomed for supporting roles, watching divine authority maintained through bloodline and tradition rather than merit or character. Your challenge to Thor isn't just about storms. It's about questioning the entire system that says some deserve power because of who their parents were. And that system needs to be questioned. Whether you win or lose, the fact that you're challenging forces Asgard to confront questions they've avoided for millennia. "So I'm a tool," Storm concluded. "A weapon you're using to attack Thor and Asgardian tradition because you resent being second choice for the throne." "You're a catalyst," Loki corrected. "And yes, I'm using you, but that doesn't make anything I've said untrue. You could protect your people with Asgardian authority. Thor does need to prove he deserves the throne rather than just inheriting it. And Asgard does need to change. My motives being selfish doesn't invalidate the validity of the outcome I'm encouraging." Storm stood, brushing grass from her uniform. "I'm going to defeat Thor if I defeat Thor, because he needs to demonstrate that his power comes with wisdom, not because you want to use my victory for your schemes. And I won't take Asgard's throne, even if I could, even if it would protect mutants, because the X-Men don't impose their will on others through superior power. We convince, we demonstrate, we earn trust through action. That's harder than divine mandate, but it's right." "Noble," Loki observed. "Impractical, but noble. I look forward to seeing if your principles survive contact with the Tempest duel's realities, because I suspect you'll discover that sometimes practical tyranny saves more lives than principled democracy allows to die." He vanished. Actual teleportation, not dramatic exit, leaving Storm alone with thoughts considerably less certain than her words had suggested. The Asgardian court was divided in ways that made Asgard's political factions more obvious than they'd been during the coronation ceremony. Storm observed them during the formal dinner she'd been required to attend. Required being diplomatic language, for guards will escort you if you refuse, watching as nobility segregated themselves into clear camps based on their position regarding the Tempest duel. Sif sat beside Storm, which was apparently a political statement that several older Asgardians found offensive based on their disapproving glares. "You're making enemies," Storm observed quietly, cutting into meat that she'd been assured came from animals that weren't sentient and didn't speak. "Good," Sif replied, her voice carrying the unconcerned tone of someone who'd fought in too many battles to care about social disapproval. "The enemies I'm making are exactly the people who believe Thor deserves the throne simply because Odin was his father. They're the same people who've opposed every reform, every challenge to tradition, every suggestion that maybe Asgard's governance could improve beyond do what the king says because he's the king. Your presence here forces a question they've avoided for millennia. Does birthright alone qualify someone for absolute power? And you think it doesn't?" "I think," Sif said carefully, "that Thor is a good man who will probably be a good king. But probably and good aren't sufficient when you're granting someone authority over billions of lives across the 9 realms. The Tempest duel forces him to prove he's not just strong or well-intentioned, but actually understands what it means to wield power as responsibility rather than privilege. That's valuable regardless of whether you win or he does." Across the hall, the Warriors 3 sat with Thor, Volstagg, Fandral, and Hogun, whose loyalty to their prince was obvious but whose expressions suggested the situation was more complicated than simple allegiance. "They're debating," Sif explained, following Storm's gaze. "Volstagg believes Thor will prove superior through sheer power. He's seen Thor summon storms that leveled mountains. Fandral thinks the duel is archaic nonsense that shouldn't override succession law. Hogun..." She paused. "Hogun is wondering if maybe Thor needs to be challenged. He's the most thoughtful of the 3, the one who asks questions before accepting answers." "Will they fight for him?" Storm asked. "If the duel goes badly, if Thor's supporters decide to force the issue through violence rather than accepting the law." "No," Sif said firmly. "Whatever else they are, the Warriors 3 honor Asgard's foundational laws. The Tempest duel is encoded into the realm's magic. Opposing it would be opposing Asgard itself. But there are others." She gestured subtly toward a group of older nobility clustered in a corner, who might not be so principled. Storm studied the group Sif indicated, older Asgardians in formal dress that suggested wealth and status, speaking in hushed tones while casting glances toward both Storm and Thor that carried more calculation than concern. "Who are they?" "The traditionalist faction," Sif replied. "Nobles who believe divine monarchy is the only legitimate form of governance, that challenges to the throne are threats to cosmic order itself, and that you, specifically you, represent dangerous precedent. They're already discussing what happens if you win, whether Asgard would accept a mortal queen, whether your victory could be challenged on grounds that you're not actually divine, despite commanding weather like a goddess." "I don't want to be queen," Storm said, not for the first time. "Doesn't matter," Sif replied. "If you defeat Thor in the Tempest duel, Asgardian law grants you the option to claim the throne. Refusing that option is your choice, but they're terrified you might accept. Because if a mutant from Midgard can prove herself superior to Thor and claim Asgard's throne, it breaks every assumption they have about how power should be distributed in the cosmos." "Good," Storm said, surprising herself with the sentiment. "Maybe those assumptions need to be broken." Sif smiled. "Careful, you're starting to sound like someone who might actually want the throne.